Welcome to Maverick Mindcast. My guest today is Gareth Icke. He's a presenter, musician, and activist. Currently, he presents for the weekly news show Right Now on Ickonic. He also hosts The Walk, The Climb on Ickonic, and the podcast with Richard Willett, WTAF. Welcome, Gareth.
Thank you for having me. Much appreciated.
Thank you for being here. So you have a really diverse background, and I kind of wanted to touch on that and take it back a little bit. Can you just walk us through the history of kind of the trajectory of your career?
It's generally been me trying to push against doors to do things that I clearly wasn't meant to do. And after getting very frustrated, realizing that another door was there that I should probably go through, and that was the one I was meant to do. So I was a footballer for a long time. And then I played beach soccer. I played for England for 5 years. And then I was pushing myself against this door the whole time, and I clearly wasn't meant to be doing it. And I wasn't getting the hint, like, at all. And then I broke my tib and fib, and my leg was flapping around, and that was the end of that. So I didn't need to try that door anymore. I was a musician for a very long time, and the same thing, you know, I was doing bits and bobs. I was playing in bands. I was touring. I toured in the States. I was touring across Europe, trying to make it, you know, whatever make it means. And I saw the kind of inner workings of that industry and how, you know, corrupt it is, basically. I was offered a lot of money to denounce my family and my father and his beliefs and change my name, even physically change my name, which I refused to do. So that kind of tainted music for me, really. So now I do bits and bobs for the Arts Council, working with kids. You know, where I live is it's not a wealthy area. And so if people are worrying about paying the bills, they're not giving their kids cello lessons, obviously. And so we take music and art to those sort of people. And I enjoy that a lot more because it's pure. You know, there isn't anyone trying to take millions of pounds out of it. And then I kind of just sort of fell into this whole being a presenter thing, which isn't something that I ever thought I'd do. And I never thought I'd be giving speeches at freedom rallies either. That's, you know, if you'd asked me 2 years, I'd be like, no, that's not me, that. So I've just kind of found myself falling into things. And so the Right Now show, I kind of got bored, really, of listening to mainstream media bubbleheads blatantly lying to me. And then any kind of alternative to that narrative was basically on YouTube, until YouTube obviously went and deleted everyone. And so I kept hearing this, oh, you've done your research on YouTube, have you? And I kind of realized that actually people only listen really to the mainstream media because it looks better. That was their, you know, it's almost like that spoonful of sugar thing. It's kind of, you know, if you package it properly, the kids will eat it up. And so you had all this knowledge coming out here that was being dismissed because it was just social, you know, it's just YouTube, it's just whatever. And all this nonsense was being pumped into every house in the country, and it was frustrating. So we thought, well, let's try and make a new show that looks like as good a level of production as the mainstream media, which is what we've hopefully, you know, managed to do with Right Now. So that people would just listen a bit more and kind of, instead of just dismissing you immediately, will actually listen to what's being said as opposed to who's saying it. And then for WTAF, it's basically, you know, WTAF is, you know, what the actual fuck, because I've found myself saying that every day for 2 years. I'll look at a news story and because everything's just so insane. And so me and Rich one day just decided to do a podcast because we were filming The Walk, actually. And so we were sat there together and it was like, should we do a podcast? Yeah, let's do a Facebook Live for a laugh. And people seem to like it. And so now we've been doing that every couple of weeks, where we just kind of look at the situation and laugh at it. Because I don't think people do that. You know, it's easy, the alternative media, like you alluded to it, you know, before we started, in terms of how some is very fear-based. Even in the alternative, it can be very fear-based. And I think, for me, I feel like we're being bullied, psychologically bullied, and sometimes physically bullied by the establishment, by their lapdogs in police and media and all this sort of stuff. And I remember how I dealt with bullies as a kid. You laugh at them because there's nothing that a bully hates more than being laughed at. And so we found with WTAF that we just laugh at these people, and as soon as you laugh at them, it strips all their power away. And so, yeah, so I find myself doing this now, which I never thought I'd do. But, you know, life has a funny way of kind of pushing you into things when
Yeah.
you're, you know, you don't think they're for you, but they blatantly are.
And I'm curious about the walk. So I recently watched The Climb, which was pretty cool. That looked tough. I don't know how you wore that jacket the whole time without getting hot.
I was sweating. Yeah.
But
Yeah. That
was
was
there
folly.
science to that, wearing that jacket?
No, I don't know why I did that, if I'm honest, other than the fact that I'd worn it for the previous few episodes. And so it was a case of being uniform. But yeah, it was foolish. We also took 4 bottles of water that size between 4 of us up the second biggest mountain in the UK. It was, we did everything wrong that we could possibly do, really. But hopefully it made people laugh.
So what sparked what was the inspiration for the walk? If you can explain a little bit more about what the walk is.
Okay, so for me, I love the series that are on UK TV, things that are called like Great British Railway Journeys, where this guy will walk old railway lines and talk to people about the history of the area. And then there's one called Walking Through History, which is presented by a guy that used to be in Blackadder, which was a comedy in the UK, where again, he does the same. And visually, they're great, and I love them. All the drone shots of all the mountains and lakes and stuff. Britain is a very beautiful place. But everyone they talk to is establishment. So it's like the professor of whatever. So whatever interview they do with people, you just get it out of a textbook. And so I was thinking, you've got all these people doing these podcasts everywhere. There's all this knowledge out there about the history of Britain, about, you know, the history of everything. And so why not incorporate the two, where you walk, you make an entertaining series, but you talk to people that are slightly different, maybe have a different perspective on it, or maybe people that are like local legends and folklore and stuff like that, rather than some professor with letters after his name that's just going to tell you what your school would tell you anyway. And so that's what we did. So we just did some walks that were around about sort of 25 to 30 miles between locations where we filmed, and then we were talking to people along the way, doing interviews. But because I attract chaos, it seems, things would always happen, things would always go wrong, and it's funny. And because both me and Rich don't take ourselves too seriously, we ended up making a series which was a perfect combination of beautiful stuff visually, complete idiocy, and then really interesting kind of thought-provoking interviews, because that's something else about the alternative media is it doesn't have any entertainment. There isn't any. And so I kind of thought, but from going to rallies and meeting with alternative people, they've generally got a really good sense of humor, because you have to be able to laugh at the world around you, otherwise you'll just go insane. And it was like, there doesn't seem to be anything out there that will kind of, you know, suit them really. So that was part of it, was let's make a series that is entertaining and funny, but also thought provoking, and kind of laugh at ourselves a bit. But also I get to walk around, and I love walking. So it was actually a bit of a win-win for me to be able to make that series. And I just, before we came on, actually, we just had a production meeting for the 3rd series, which is in Scotland. So we start filming that in June. So we've just been going through the logistics and some of the guests and stuff. And it's interesting because when we did the 1st series, Ickonic was tiny, like no one knew who they were. And so I was contacting people to be potential guests who were like, "No, you're all right. I'm washing my hair that day." And then the 2nd series, it started to grow. And so we got a lot more guests, a lot more interesting people. And so now with the 3rd series, because Ickonic is more well known now, and people, you know, I guess it has a little bit more kind of, you know, substance to it in people's minds. When we're going to people saying, "Would you like to be on this series?" you're getting a yes from people that you probably wouldn't have got a yes from 2 years ago. So that's good. And we're going to try and do the climb too as well. We're going to climb Ben Nevis, which is the biggest, it's the highest, and we're going to try and get Rich up there this time.
Oh, and I love the I guess it was for WTAF, the haunting. That was, were you really scared? I have to know.
It was
more theatrics.
It was I probably wasn't as scared as the edit would make it look, but it was a strange house. It was an amazing house, for people that haven't seen it, it's literally like a semi-detached council house in England that this guy has just turned every room into a different place and time.
It was
And
magical.
it was crazy. But what was crazy about the haunted room, like the room that was actually, it was creepy, is even though I know it's just a bedroom in a semi-detached council house, all the wooden paneling, the four-poster bed, everything in there had actually come out of castles and stately homes in Scotland. So actually you weren't in a council house. You actually were somewhere hundreds of years ago where not such nice things had gone on and stuff. So it did have that kind of weird vibe about it. Of actually, I'd put it this way: I wouldn't have slept there. I wouldn't have slept there.
I can't remember what Richard said with the candle, but it was hilarious. Like the yes or no, it was like something about COVID.
Yeah, he's a really funny guy, Rich.
Hilarious. But he's also actually a great interviewer too. So he's multi-dimensional, that's for sure.
Definitely. I think what's so amazing about him as well, though, is he doesn't realize it. Like he will just say things and he doesn't realize it's funny. And everyone else is then really belly laughing and he's kind of looking at you like, oh, right. Oh, was that funny? Sorry. Which I think is great because then he doesn't try and play up on anything. He's just naturally funny. And he is naturally a very good interviewer as well. You're right.
Definitely. Yeah, no, he'll bring another dimension to someone's work. And you could see they kind of have the epiphany too. They're like, yeah, I didn't think about it that way, but yeah. And I'm like, yeah. So anyway, that's a whole nother tangent, but I do really enjoy his style and I admire it a lot as a newcomer to the podcast world. So I do want to touch on something that you brought up. It was almost like perfect. And I derailed it a little, but that's all good. The expert thing. So I have to admit, I realized once I started watching Ickonic and other alternative content that I was kind of into that paradigm too. Like we're so used to having that authoritarian / expert come on and we're like, oh, okay, yeah. But what I like about right now is that you have a lot of regular people just like me or you who can speak to experiences that give them a level of expertise or a level of authority to speak on those things. And I think we're just, as a people, we're not used to that. We're used to like designated figures in the world who are like, no, you can't speak to that. He or she can because they have a PhD or they have this or they have that. And I find myself in the past like, oh, well, who is this person? I don't know this person, like, And now I'm like, well, that's the point. You don't know this person and they are giving an alternative view because I think we've been programmed to look for that expert. Oh, I know him. He spoke, 10 years now, every year he speaks on the same thing. And that's the expert, he's the one who tells us what's right and what's wrong. And so I love that aspect of how I feel this new alternative media is emerging where we're becoming the people that are people of interest. We're becoming the people who can speak to really compelling topics that are affecting our lives every day. And I love that you guys bring that out.
Yeah, I think it's really important. But I think everyone's almost programmed in that way, to be honest. Like, if you were on an aeroplane and the pilot came on and he was like, all right, I'm going to be flying you to, where is it again? You'd be like, get me off the plane. Like, I want a posh sounding man who's definitely wearing a suit. But, we're programmed that way, aren't we? But it was really interesting with that because when we did the walk, there was one episode where we were in Derbyshire, which is where I live. And it was an old workhouse. And basically they were taking kids from white kids, as young as 4, some of them, they were taking them from orphanages down in London, promising them the world, get out of the slums of London and we'll take you, you'll be able to eat plum pudding and ride horses and all this sort of stuff. Stuck them in the workhouse and a lot of them died there, to basically kind of work the cotton that the black slaves on the plantation had been picking. And it was almost this kind of, I was trying to get across this whole kind of, it's not about race, it's about class. They hate both of us. Do you know what I mean? And and so I tried to get someone who was, a professor at a local university to kind of try and talk about stuff. And most of them weren't willing to get involved, to be honest. And in the end, we found a lady who'd grown up there, and she was probably 70, 71 years old, and she'd grown up in that area. She was like, I'll talk to you about it because I've spent my life here. I've grown up here and I've researched it, and all these stories of what happened at this mill have been passed on through legend. And she was fantastic. And I remember talking to her, and I remember saying to the camera afterwards, like, I could have had like these PhDs, and it's just nonsense, because they don't know. They just, if I ask a professor to come on, what's he going to do? Read a book on it and then come and regurgitate the book to me? Well, I'd rather talk to the person that was, that's got the actual information, that hasn't been airbrushed or whatever. So you're absolutely right. And that's something, I mean, don't get me wrong, on right now, we have doctors and scientists on. And like today, we filmed with an MP in Australia who's just quit. He's just gone, I'm not running for re-election because you're all corrupt and your politics is broken. So it's amazing. But he's still obviously in a position of authority for now. But then at the same time, then you can just talk to people on the street that have had personal experiences. And I think it's important that everyone has a voice. We're all just as valid as each other.
Exactly. And that's the thing. I think that's where that comes from. It's like the subconscious, like, well, we don't have anything to say. We're just normal people, we're just living our lives. And we do, we have we as everyday people have a lot to contribute. And I think we need to hear more of our voices, because that's why we feel isolated. We feel, alone, or we feel confused about what's going on in the world so often, because of the very well-crafted narratives that we're always getting, that all say the same thing constantly, but don't seem to reflect our actual reality.
No, exactly. And we get the airbrushed version of everything as well. And social media is like that. People will take a selfie, but they'll take 20 of them until they've got the perfect one, and they'll put that out there. And it's like, here, I'm out with my mates with the champagne, and they'll take a photo. And it's like, yeah, but yesterday you were crying on the sofa in your dressing gown because the fella had, like, cheated on you. But you're not going to put a photo of yourself doing that. So you kind of put up this life which is all perfect, and then other people look at that and go, their life is so perfect, mine's not. It's like their life isn't perfect. Their life isn't at all. And I think it's the same with having these experts and these people that are put on media, even people that have bios and life stories on telly. They're always successful people in people's minds of what is successful. So then I made my first million, and actually their lives are no more interesting than everyone else's. It's just, you kind of just have this idea of what is success and what is interesting, and it's not necessarily true. I think if you made a life story of the fella across the road, it would be just as interesting as a life story of any famous person at all. But people are taught to almost just look up to celeb or success and kind of look down on themselves a bit, which is sad, but a lot of people are guilty of that.
Well, yeah, but I definitely 100% agree that we've been so socialized and indoctrinated to think that way. Like, these are the people who tell you this. These are the people that you look up to for this. These are the beautiful people, like even here, especially in the US. I mean, we are like such a slow, well, not as much anymore. I think that was one positive thing with this whole COVID stuff. But I think people finally were like, oh, I could live without you, because nobody was shooting movies, nobody was doing, and then they started getting political, and everyone was just like, I don't care what you think about politics. I just care what, your music is about, or what you wear on the red carpet. But yeah, we're very driven by that. Even people will have like the sexiest man alive, the sexiest woman alive, and then we cling on to that paradigm of that, like, oh, the Kardashians, oh, and then the reality shows and everything else, which are the furthest thing from reality. So it's kind of ironic, right?
I don't understand the world's sexiest man and women thing, because surely that's completely objective, isn't it? What you find attractive, someone else won't, and vice versa. So I've always found that a strange one. Who chooses that?
Well, that's I have a whole nother take on that. I just feel like it's once again creating that divide in relationships. It's tearing down any kind of substance to, getting to know someone. And it's also kind of like, well, your guy needs to look like this guy. and then
Yeah.
that's been a huge problem. I mean, there's so many more layers to that, so that's not the only thing. But from a superficial level, at least here, and that's why I think I've always liked British films and productions more, because I feel like it's a lot less based on looks and a lot more based on talent. Like, can you act? Can you? And that's why we actually tend to kidnap a lot of those actors, because we pay a lot of money, and the industry is Hollywood, and they come here and they pretend they have American accents, and they play in all our movies, because we don't really care about if you can act. It's like, well, what do you look like? Do you look like Megan Fox, who, I personally think she can't act, but she's a very pretty woman, do you look like, I don't know, whatever that Australian guy's name is, but Chris,
Hemsworth, is it?
yeah, like, did you look like these people? We care more about that than we do. And if you don't look like that person, then you're funny, or you're always the butt of the joke, or, like, you're not really a real character. You're like a sidekick, or, that's just how and I think that's starting to change a lot, but unfortunately, I think it's changing because of the woke mentality, not because of actual substance. It's just like, no, now everyone who's not, everyone who looks completely different is normal, and you're the bad person and whatever. But it's just all this polarizing type of mentalities that are being pushed out right now. And of course, when you think in, polar opposites, you create a lot of division. And that's another thing I kind of want to talk to you about, just getting back into the media aspect, is this, like, I don't watch a lot of mainstream media, but when I do, I notice it's always like, well, there's our story, which is truth, and then there's this misinformation. And it's funny, because when I was in high school, I read the book 1984. I'm sure that's not required reading anymore. But
No.
I immediately, like, the first time I heard that word, like, constantly being spoken out in the mainstream media, I was very triggered by it. I was just like, wait, what? Misinformation? Because I know they spoke a lot about, I remembered that book, and I haven't read it since high school, which was a long time ago. But I'm just like, what is that? And now it's everywhere. It's like, oh, that's misinformation. We have to take this down. We have to do that. I mean, even I started an Instagram account, and every single thing I posted, I think I tagged David Icke official because a quote he did, and I just put in my story, and immediately it got taken down. And I'm like, well, how could you let him have an account? If I can't tag him, why does he have an account? It just doesn't make sense. But it's like, it's this whole, like, we're taking care of you. We know what you can handle. We know what you can't handle. Don't worry about it. We're on it. Like, oh, nope, you messed up on that one. Got to take that down. It's very, like, dystopic and creepy. And I was wondering what your take is on that, because it feels like you have to choose between misinformation, going on the fringe and getting your information somewhere else, and truth, which is, what we're telling you. You need to trust us. And it's scary.
It is very 1984. You listen to what the party says, or you listen to the wrong uns. It is very much like that. I hear it's been pretty bad for a while, to be fair, in terms of the misinformation, fake news, that sort of stuff. They're actually been kind of strict in Britain, probably more so than in the US. I mean, I've got a friend that when my dad got deleted off of everything and totally wiped, and there were lots of other people around the beginning of the COVID nonsense that were getting kicked off of social media for asking questions, having YouTube channels deleted with hundreds of videos on, just like that. I spoke to a friend who was quite connected to people at Google in the States, and he said to me, he'd spoken to friends there and was saying, what the hell is this about? And they were saying it was coming from the UK. So the censorship, including censorship of conservative voices in the US, the deletion and the censorship was being driven from the United Kingdom, which I was really surprised by. But he was saying that some of the people that were saying to him, like, this isn't us, we're not doing this. This whole censorship thing is coming out of the UK. I kind of feel with Great Britain that it almost pretends to have been a former world giant, and actually no, it's just a little old island now, just kind of separate from Europe out on its own. When actually I do think, if you get down a few layers behind the shadows, I still think that Britain is a very powerful place. Certainly the city of London is a very powerful place, and it drives a lot of what goes on around the world, which is why I think it was so important that the protest movement was so enormous here. It was the biggest in the world, because by ending the pandemic, even though, I mean, maybe Putin ended the pandemic, it's hard to keep up, but by ending the pandemic here, that then resonated out to the rest of the world. And there's little pockets like in Australia and New Zealand and Canada, but generally it's done now. And I think that's significant that protest and that real fight back came out of London. Because it didn't even come out of the UK, it didn't come out of Scotland. The Scotland kind of Braveheart, fighting back, freedom was,
I know.
oh, it was crazy. They didn't do anything for a long time. Now they're starting to stand up. And the same with Wales and Ireland. And it's funny having, as an Englishman, we see the Celts as hard nuts, basically. You know, they're tough. You don't mess around with them. Yet when it came to the whole COVID stuff and having the freedoms stripped away, they just sat back and went, yeah, take it, have all of it. Whereas the English, who are generally known as, you know, you southern softy leftist idiots, are kind of, they were the ones that stood up and went, no, not tonight, Henry. And so, you know, that's interesting. I went off on a tangent then. Sorry, I completely lost my way. But yeah, for me, by silencing someone, you're not proving them wrong. You're doing the opposite. You know, because it would have been really easy with, say my dad, for instance. He's saying all this stuff about COVID early doors. Now, don't delete him. Get him on the BBC. Get him on the BBC with a bunch of scientists and let them completely destroy him. Destroy the argument. Do it. Put it on primetime TV, and you'd end it. You'd end the argument. I think that all the time. But by refusing to debate and refusing to have a conversation with people that are having alternative views, I don't think that is the way to do it at all. I think you should get them on, and then if
But don't you think it's because they can't defend
well,
it?
exactly. Well, that's exactly it.
Down to.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think a lot more people see through that, you know, now.
Right.
Yeah, I
don't
mean,
know that I think so, but I don't know. I just don't know. It's so hard to tell because we are still, I feel so isolated. Because when you guys, I only know that you guys have rallies, freedom rallies and things through alternative media. You know, I only know that something's going on in Australia or somewhere. I'm always hoping, but I don't know. I have to dig for that information. So
oh
it's
yeah,
really hard to, and that's obviously done on purpose because, and I feel like that's what the whole social distancing and everything else was because, and I feel like I always watch all your father's interviews, and you know, when David speaks about these rallies, he always says, oh, you know, people say, I just never felt an energy like that before. It's like and that's really the heart of what they're afraid of, you know. So there's all this defaming people who don't buy the narrative, calling them really derogatory names. They're racist, they're Nazis, they're this, they're that. You know, I'm hoping people see through those types of tactics, which is just so obvious. It's like, you know, and your father was experiencing that decades ago. I mean, he's
yeah,
fully armed and ready for these kind of attacks, but most aren't because it wasn't as prevalent as it is now because there's so much to hide, there's so much to defend on their part.
yeah. And people don't like being called names, and I get that completely. You know, for me, after years of getting abuse, you kind of, as long as I know I'm not those things, it's fine. So I remember, you know, during 2014, when Israel was just bombarding Gaza, I was speaking out against it, and I was getting called names, you know, and it was like, oh man, what the hell? Like, but then in the end, it just becomes water off a duck's back. It's like, you can call me what you want. I know that's not true, so it doesn't matter. That's fine. But it is very difficult for people that are generally not into this information, but COVID has been their red pill, and they come to these rallies, and I have so many conversations with people. They just, because we do the show and stuff, they see a face and they think, I recognize that, I'll beeline for that, and they'll come over and they'll say, like, I'm on my own, like I've never been to one of these before, but like my family don't really speak to me, I've got nothing in common with my old friends. And so all of a sudden they come to these rallies and they find their tribe. And you know, I hear a lot of people say, oh, these rallies don't do anything, they don't change policy. And it's like, well, I think they did a little bit in the UK in terms of change policy, definitely. because they knew they couldn't get away with it anymore. But what it did more importantly, I think, is give these people strength, and they built, you know, communities and stuff. And these rallies saved people's lives. 100%. They saved people from falling into despair because they had a tribe all of a sudden. They had somewhere to belong. And that empowered them enough to carry on fighting through this nonsense when they were, you know, losing their jobs and their way of life and all this sort of stuff. But yeah, the protest movement is interesting that you say they weren't covering it there, because it was funny here. When it first started, it was very small. It was, you know, 600 people, a protest or whatever, right from the beginning. And that made it in the media. They were in the media then. Fringe bunch of anti-vaxxers and conspiracy theorists, right? So you could paint them off as that, and people go, oh, look at these nutters. And then the numbers got to around about sort of 10,000. And they would then say hundreds of anti-vaxxers, you know, and it was creeping up. And then it got to about 40,000. I remember speaking in London, there was about 40,000 people there. And there was this piece in the Daily Mail, I think it was, where they were talking about this white supremacist nonsense. And I remember looking at the photo of the crowd, and I spotted 2 hijabs, and it's like, that's literally the worst white supremacist rally I have ever seen in my life, because you've got every creed, every color, every religion, every sexual orientation there, with, you know, there's flags for everything. It's all just a collective of people. And then they got bigger and they got bigger. And then around March 2021, when they imposed another lockdown, the rallies went mad. The marches, we're talking 500,000, just smashing through London, walking through, peaceful. And I remember the police came, and I was there. I was with my sister and her daughter, and the police came wading in, and you could just see the look on the coppers' eyes as they went, oh shit, oh shit, there's too many of them. It's too many of them. And they backed off and they retreated, and we carried on. And it didn't even make it into the press. Didn't even make it. And it's like, oh, you're going to refuse to talk. And so then the next week it was the same, and they didn't mention it. So then the protest started moving to the BBC. So you basically would start outside the building. So you're taking over the area. They can't ignore that then, because they can't get in and out. And so then the media would then start trying to focus more on, there was a scuffle. It's like, yeah, a policeman pushed someone, so he pushed him back. You just ignored the other hundreds of thousands of people that were all peacefully walking around together, you know. And they really tried to kind of almost look the other way. And it's interesting, given everything that's happened, but RT were the only ones that were sending journalists. So RT were live streaming on their Rupti service. They were live streaming all these protests. So the only reason anyone was knowing about them, really, outside us lot, you know, who would go looking for stuff, was through RT. And there's no RT in England now. You can't get RT on the telly or anywhere in the UK. They banned it as a result of this whole Ukraine nonsense. But what they struggled with was, okay, hundreds of anti-vaxxers and conspiracy theorists. Okay, I can imagine there's hundreds of them nutters, right? Okay, but then if you would give the actual figures when those protests got huge, I mean, if you picked up a newspaper and it said, you know, and you were a normie, as much as I don't necessarily like that term, but 500,000 anti-vaxxers and conspiracy theorists, 500,000, like that's not a fringe group. 500,000, that's an insane amount of people. Maybe they're not anti-vaxxers and conspiracy theorists. Maybe actually they've got a legitimate concern about something. Let's have a look into it. And so they couldn't have that. So they just painted us as far right and all that stuff, which is hilarious, because I've been called a southern softy leftist my whole life. But there you go.
But maybe also we deserve more. I mean, this polarity, it drives me crazy that we always have to think in concepts and labels. We've been taught to do that. And like what triggered this thought was when you said, well, it's not changing policy or anything, these rallies. Like, you don't, like, it's just I was red pill too, to realize, like, wow, everything we do to understand the world has to be labeled. It has to be encapsulated into a policy. A person has to be encapsulated into a label. You know, we identify with our jobs, we identify with where we live, you know, and we have these such simplistic, one-dimensional ways of navigating through the world and understanding the world. You know, like, oh, well, what's that policy about? What's that law about? And that's not really what being human and living is. You know, rallies, I think, are important for, like we said, the energy, And I think it kind of reconnects you with being a human being again. It's not always about the outcome, it's just about the actual experience and the journey, and understanding people. Like, oh, what are you? Oh, you're a Trumper. Like here, that's how you get labeled. It's like, oh, you're a Trumper. Oh, you're a right wing. You're a left wing. You're this. You're that. And to me, it's just so terribly insulting that
Yeah.
we reduce people down to these labels instead of just like, who are you? What are you about? And that's why I think we fall prey to those accusations and those, like so many people do, because that's how they see the world. They're like, oh, well, they're not part of the mainstream narrative, so they must be Nazis, racists, whatever. It's just, I'm really hoping that that's something en masse that comes out of all of this, that we don't think in those ways anymore, and children are taught to think that way. And I look around at these kids now, and I remember when I was a teenager, but it's like, you got a bunch of tattoos, you got a bunch of piercings, and you got your hair's green. And then I look at every other kid and they all look the same. But if you ask them, they're like, well, nobody understands me because I'm different. I'm so unique. Look at me, and it's like, no, I just saw 10 other kids like you just pass me by. I know who you are because I recognize you all. It doesn't matter what you look like. If you all look the same, you look the same. And they're teaching, these kids are grabbing onto ideologies and labels and thinking that makes them special or different, when that's not really it at all. It's just who you are as a person. What are you about? Who cares about all that stuff? Because I actually feel it's very dehumanizing.
Yeah, and I think what I've seen from when I was at school, like, and this isn't necessarily a good thing either, but people would show off. So you would be like, the kid would be like, well, my dad drives a Mercedes. Oh, does he? Yeah, my dad's on 200 grand a year. Oh, and people would show off. I play football for so and so. Whereas now they've been taught to almost be the other end of to be a victim. And so actually the top trump card is always the kind of, my dad did this and that, and then I never had any opportunities, and because of my gender, I don't have this, and it's almost like, I don't know how much of that came from reality TV, stuff like the X Factor. When people would get up there and they've always got a sob story.
Yeah.
Why? Just sing. I don't care. But it was almost like that's happened as well. And I see that in the way that kids are now. They're being taught to be victims, and they're taught to be depressed, and they're taught that they don't have opportunities in life because of X, Y, and Z, generally because of the white man or whatever. And I think that's a terrible lesson for kids, to limit them and tell them that their existence is limited by the labels of whatever they identify as. And I mean, I don't identify as one at all. I get labeled, I get called ones, but I often think, when people say, oh, hi, I don't know, I'm a left-handed transgender man in a wheelchair. It's like, okay, I'm Gareth. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter. Like, none of these labels are relevant to anything at all. They're just part of your experience.
Yeah, but it seems to be that's the currency for social interaction these days, so they're just trying to appeal to and be more likable, whatever the currency is at this moment. And that's what it is. It's like, okay, to be a victim, to be different, it's just, it's very sad because it's very disempowering to me. It's a movement that takes you straight off a cliff.
Yeah,
It's not going
100%.
anywhere but off a cliff.
Yeah.
And I also feel in the alternative media, a lot of times it's the same rhetoric. It's like, oh, somebody will be holding a mug and it says like leftist tears in it or something. It's just very like, it's divisive too. It's like, oh, well, they're crazy. They don't know what they're talking about. I'm just like, I don't care what your background is. If you're acting crazy, that's a problem for me. I just think you're crazy. I don't care if you're crazy because you're a leftist or whatever, but we fall into these habits of, labeling people and then presuming one thing or the other. I'm vegan, so a lot of people assume that I'm like a typical vegan because I know what a typical vegan is, and yeah, I don't like them either. But and I'm not, and I happen to be pretty conservative in my views, whatever that means. It's just a descriptive word. I wouldn't say I'm a conservative. but it doesn't mean anything. To me, it's very important, and it's something that one of the best decisions I ever made. But I actually never thought I would say this, or never. I actually get uneasy when I hear people talking about limiting other people's choices of food and saying, "Oh, we're going to be eating bugs and we're going to be doing this and that." I'm like, no, people should be able to eat whatever they want whenever they want. We don't need you telling us because of the environment and this, that, and the other, that, this is dangerous, this is bad. I'm like, let everybody do what they want to do. That's just something that I embrace. That's something that's important to me. It doesn't have to be important to the rest of the world. And it certainly doesn't give me more of a moral higher ground
Yeah.
than other. And I've had so many people say to me, well, I'm not, so is that okay? Like, of course, I'm not gonna, oh, you're not. Oh, well, I'd be a very lonely person, first of all, if that was my criteria.
Yeah,
Second
absolutely.
of all, like, I wouldn't want anybody pushing. I've had so many people react to me in that way, like, oh, this or that. And I'm like, yeah, and I'm good, like, you do you, I do me. So I've had a lot of people have very strong reactions just to me saying, that I'm vegan. So and they're not, and then they get kind of like touchy and weird about it. And so I don't want to make anybody else feel like that either.
That's one thing I've noticed, is that when people talk about left and right, like for me, they're generally two cheeks on the same arse for me in terms of the political side of it. But I kind of think the Overton window has moved to such a point in terms of that you do you, hun, is now like a far right view, which is insane, because I'm the same as you. That's how I live my life. You do you, and I'll do me, and that's fine. That's great, and we'll all go for a pint, unless you don't drink, in which case you have orange juice. But that is now a kind of, COVID particularly has made that like a selfish way to think. No, not you do you and I do me. You do what the collective says is right, and the collective being whatever the establishment says. You having your individuality could kill granny. And it's like, you create this thing, and you created it in England. You hear it. The first time I heard public health was during the Rona. They're just public health. It's like, what is public health? What do you mean? Everyone's health is different. Everyone's individual. That guy's 30 stone. What do you mean? We're not the same. We don't have the same health. That guy's going to collapse any minute. But that terminology you hear a lot now and it's all very much same with climate change. The greater good, for the greater good, for the collective, for the good of society. And that feels very Orwellian to me.
Oh, absolutely. It's very scary. This is kind of introducing something totally new, but just we were talking about this before we started, but just the whole, I don't know if you've noticed the nuances of like the alternative media, and sometimes it does get me a little like, because I feel like they don't push the envelope enough. Like the fear-based is very important. And I guess I'll interject an instance, because when your father did the London Real interviews, okay, and came out and said that the Rona doesn't exist. Who knows if I'll get banned for that, but I don't care. I personally was like, if this is a possibility, I absolutely want to explore this, because I love my freedom and I don't like what's going on right now. Yet what astonished me was so much of the I knew the mainstream was going to do that, but the alternative media seemed to poo-poo it and get very upset by it as well. Like, no, that's not, and seemingly without any discourse around it or debate. And that just made me think. That kind of red pilled me further to the alternative. I'm like, okay, so fear is actually a pretty good driving force for the alternative media too, because whether it is or it's not is not the point. It's that what he said had a lot of validity to it. There seemed to be a lot of research behind it, and yet I felt like it just fell on its face, and I was so shocked at that. Like, I remember at least a year ago, he posted a video and it was like, share this with everyone, must see, and it was with Dr. Kaufman. And it was about the tests, and it was about all these things that had been revealed to prove this theory. And yet I heard nothing. And I run in a lot of circles of people who are tired of all this. And I bring it up and it's like, I see the look of like, no, it exists. They're exaggerating, but whatever. And, I'm just curious about your take on that, because I would have thought that would have been a mind blowing thing that people would have wanted to investigate, would have wanted to bring to the forefront to see, not necessarily just take face value and accept, but to be like, oh, this could possibly end this madness. And we can kind of go back to, some semblance of freedom.
I think a lot of people are terrified of putting all their chips on the table.
Mm.
And by saying, I don't believe it exists, you are putting every chip on the table. It's all in there. You've got nothing in reserve that you can use later on if it turns out to not be that. It's like, yeah, but I also, whereas, as long as you don't go to that length, you can sort of maneuver around a little bit, and you can have a little bit of an opinion on different bits, but you won't go that far. I think that's part of it. I also think that people would be aware that it was the talking about it not existing, which is what got my dad kicked off everything. Yes. Now, in the media here, they
in itself. Sorry, not to interrupt, but isn't that a little thought provoking?
Well, exactly.
If it was so absurd, keep it on. People will laugh at it.
Exactly. And that was the thing. Like here, they said in the media that it was him talking about 5G that got him deleted from everything. It's absolute nonsense. It was absolute nonsense, because we'd been producing videos and articles on 5G for the last 6-7 years that were going way beyond what he'd said in those London reels about the dangers of 5G. So it was nothing to do with that at all. And they were happy for all these videos to go out talking about 5G, talking about all this other stuff. As soon as he said it's nonsense, that was it. Bang, blanket ban across everything. The only thing he's not banned from in terms of a mainstream thing is Instagram. And that's because I basically just post family pictures and bits and bobs like that. I don't post anything that would get him banned. The reason for doing that is, one, it keeps a foot into the mainstream in the sense that people can then see that account and then maybe go and visit their website and whatever else, but also because it annoys the censors so much. So there's a group called the Center for Countering Digital Hate. Guys called absolute scumbags. The guy's called Imran Ahmed, who goes on about, people making money in the alternative when the guy drives a Range Rover and lives in a very, very expensive part of London. So he's doing all right for his charity. But he
in other positions that had nothing, right? They just keep moving him into different positions.
Yeah, well, it was started by the Labour Party, basically, in the UK. They started the Centre of Countering Digital Hate. The guy that formed it, Morgan McSweeney, is now the chief of staff for the head of the Labour Party. Imran Ahmed was a spin doctor for the Labour Party. So they're all tied in. They tie in as well into Centre for American Progress, which is part of the Democratic Party. It goes all the way into Hillary and Podesta. They're all in together. So they're independent. Yeah. So they obviously were massively behind getting people banned, including my dad. But in interviews, he always brings up Instagram when he's still on Instagram. And I know it eats at him. So it's like part of me thinks, you know what, screw Instagram. I don't want to use them. They're owned by Facebook. They're part of the problem. Let's just go out in a blaze of glory and just post a load of truth bombs that are going to, wake a load of people up for 5 minutes and then get deleted and lose everything. And it's kind of like, okay, I could do that, or we could carry on annoying Imran Ahmed, which is funny, and then spread the truth through other means and other social media outlets, places like Getter and Parler and places like that where they're not censoring you.
BitChute's pretty good too. I post these on BitChute and Rumble.
Yeah, BitChute's great, and Ray from BitChute is a really, really nice bloke. And I remember when we were first getting kicked off of YouTube, or we were getting banned and all this sort of stuff. And what's funny is all the media outlets in the UK, when they were trying to attack us, were saying this is how much money they're making off of YouTube with these YouTube videos. And it's like, we'd been demonetized on YouTube for about 5 years. So we weren't making a penny, because obviously it's not about money. But they don't obviously care about facts. So they were putting that out there. And so it was obvious that the time was coming and that the YouTube was going to go. And there were like hundreds of videos. I hadn't made most of them, so I didn't have copies of most of them. And it's like, Jesus, like if they delete it, this stuff's gone. Like maybe the last 2 years worth of videos I've got stored, but the rest are all gone. And so I spoke to Ray at BitChute, and someone had set up an account on BitChute that was official David Icke, and it wasn't official David Icke, it wasn't us, but it had cloned the whole YouTube channel and it had taken every single video across. And so he then spoke to them and set the channel to us. So then all of a sudden, I didn't have to upload any of these old videos. When YouTube went, it was already there, mirrored. It was amazing. And I was like, literally, you've saved my life, because all these videos are saved. And then there's another website called Alt Censored, which did the same. They mirrored all the accounts, so they stored all those videos. And now, like I'm able, like a couple of days ago, I went back and got an interview that he'd done with We Are Change in 2014, where he was talking about what the plan was to start a third world war with Russia and China, and maybe Iran coming in with those two against the West and NATO, and how they would use Ukraine to start that war by using Ukraine and Crimea to get the Russian conflict with NATO, which China would come in behind. That would have been deleted. Well, it was deleted by YouTube, but because these channels saved it, I was able to re-download that and re-upload it again on band.video and places like that, of like, look, this is what he was saying in 2014, and it's exactly what they're doing. This is exactly what they're doing, which is why I'm very untrusting of anything to do with Russia, Ukraine, in terms of what I'm being told about it.
Well, just jumping on, and I saw you did that post on Instagram about like, I'm, with the mask and the rainbow, and it's just extraordinary how many people are just it's just like, here kitty kitty, here kitty kitty, it's just amazing. People just keep jumping from one conversation to the next. That I'm not on social media. I just got back on with Instagram for the podcast, but I very happily got off of everything. And it's funny, I kept LinkedIn, and I'm just like, I go on there very infrequently, but now that I have been, I'm just like, everybody's posting these incredibly personal, political. I'm so tempted to just be like, I'm sorry, when did LinkedIn become Facebook? It's like so funny, because people they just can't help themselves. Even on a professional career site, they're virtue signaling. If it's not a personal story or an anecdote, it's something else. I don't want to get into it. I saw somebody liked this post of another woman in the UK whose husband had been jabbed and almost died in the hospital. And she put this on LinkedIn, and she's like, and the nurse told us, thank God he had the jabs. And then saying how she's going to go back. They're both going to go back when he gets out of the hospital for the booster. And I'm seeing this on LinkedIn. I'm like, why am I seeing this on LinkedIn? Like, it's crazy. Everybody's just jumping. It's like we're so lost, and we're so looking for meaning in our lives, that I think that's what the COVID experience was about, that too. It was like, we're in this together, and I've always kind of been the person who travels alone. I live a pretty unconventional life, and I'm just like, no, I'm good. Like, I don't need to be in this with anyone. Like, I just want to get on a plane and do things and travel again with dignity. And no, I'm not feeling this, because I'm not seeing what you're telling me out in reality. So I don't want to be a part of this movement.
No, it is strange. I do wonder with some of these people if they, just check what's trending on Twitter in the morning, just to see what they need to change their avatar to. What am I supporting today? What's the virtue signal for today? Because here in England, to support the NHS, it was a blue heart, right? So if you've got a blue heart, it means you wear a mask, and you've got 20 jabs in your head looking like Hellraiser. You saved everyone's granny. That then just changed from a blue heart to a Ukrainian flag overnight. Like, just they've all gone into their accounts. Bang.
Yellow.
All
yeah,
right.
It's unbelievable. And I kind of went off on something else, but I did want to say that your father's books, I'm astonished every time. And I watch all his interviews. I'm like, nobody brings this stuff up. How are they not bringing this stuff up? Like, human race, get off your knees. I can't believe, and that was written in what, 2009, 2000. I know it was published, I think, in 2010, but it was written before that. I can't believe the things that were in there that he uncovered through his research. Like, everything about what's happening right now is in that book. I've read it to people and they're like, what's the name of that book again? I'm like, well, it's 700 pages. Just please try, you know? But it's just, I don't know. I just finished reading The Biggest Secret again, and there's things in there, you know, and it's amazing. And I really think he set a precedent, because then when I read other folks who are a little younger who've come out after him, it's kind of like a branching off of a lot of his work. And but it's just extraordinary what research can uncover. You know, the guy's not having premonitions and psychic or anything. It's just, it's all out there. It's just, do you want to see it? Do you want to uncover it? Do you want to expose it?
Exactly. They always tell us. I don't know if that's, you know, a kind of a rite of passage thing, but they do always tell us. And I wonder if you go into like folklore with the vampire, like, you have to invite the vampire in. The vampire can't just kick the door down and have a go at your neck. You need to invite them in. So it's almost like they have to tell us, because then, you know, by silence is compliance and consent. And so then they can go ahead and do what they do. And it's interesting you say that, like with my dad, like when you talk to people about his book, the one that's called The Answer, people will say, you know, oh, that's the one where he wrote about COVID. And it's like, that book was more than 80% finished when COVID started. Because obviously I run the publishing company now, and then my brother was running it, and I was doing other bits and bobs, but I was, you know, doing all the artworks and stuff for his books. I do the artwork for like his last 4 books, including that one. And so, you know, I was getting updates from him of like, you know, I'm sort of 10 chapters in. I reckon I've probably got, you know, X amount of time to go. So obviously you're going to need to get a proofreader booked in. So obviously you're planning everything in advance. And then COVID hit, and the book's about COVID, but it's not. I think the last 3 chapters were. It's just insane. And like you say, it's what research brings you, because they always tell you. And if you're willing to look, and if you're willing to go, and this again goes into what you're saying about the alternative a bit, if you're willing to go beyond the Rubicon, and you don't give a shit about what people think, you care about the truth. And if I say the truth, I'm going to get laughed at, I'm going to get banned, I'm going to get spat at and hated. Most people will go, well, maybe I'll just pull back a little bit on that bit. Whereas my dad's just like, no, that's the truth, so that's fine. And you know, I think most of that came probably from being completely rinsed when that whole thing happened in the early 90s, where he was just a laughing stock. And I was a kid, and it was pretty brutal, if I'm honest. But what it does is it knocks that I care what people think out of you. I hear it all the time. People say, you know, I don't care what people think. You're like,
Yes, you do.
you do. Whereas if you've actually really, really had it beaten out of you to the point where you're like, I don't even care. I don't even care anymore. This is the truth. Deal with it. And I think that is something that's important, that maybe some elements of the alternative aren't quite there on, because they're, you know, and this isn't meant as an insult, but maybe there is still a bit of ego there. I mean, everyone has ego, of course they do, but there is still that little bit of ego there that actually, if I go beyond the Rubicon, I'm going to get some grief. So I'm just going to sit just behind it. So I'm doing just enough, like I'm trying to push back, but I'm not quite willing to go there. Whereas obviously my old man's gone there, and then all the way over there somewhere. Out the room.
Profitable, and they've spun off some kind of product or something that plays into that, like, oh, you know, you need this because we're going to be starving soon, and the supply chain, you know, it's just like all this, you know, prepper stuff. And you know, it's so easy to incorporate, because a lot of the alternative media, I think, also is predicated on fear of this doomsday. Not saying that that won't happen, who knows, but it's always kind of waiting for it. You know, it's around the corner, it's around the corner, it's this thing that's going to make it happen. You know, we were at this like constant tipping point all the time. So I think that would really kind of take away a lot from that particular narrative. People wouldn't resonate as much anymore. But yeah, that was very shocking for me. And yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I think at the heart of everything, with not to, you are my guest, but just to, one other thing about your dad is that I love when he says the heart does what's right and never questions the consequences. It just
No.
simply does it. It does
Yeah.
never say, well, this is the right thing to do, but what is that going to do for, what's what's going to happen to me if I do it? And I never really heard anybody say anything like that before. I never saw somebody, when they look into the camera, the eyes are just fixed. There's no blinking. There's no any kind of backing down. It's just, this
Yeah.
is the truth. This is my truth, and take it or leave it. This is my truth. So
But
I really
that's the thing.
like
I think it's so important to just have your line, and I'm not crossing it. It's not happening,
that.
And I heard a lot of terms, of particularly to do with the jab and stuff. It was like, but obviously if they make it difficult, then well, go and do it now, then, mate. Because if they're gonna make things difficult, and obviously they're gonna come back and revisit all this stuff again, as they always do.
But understand that what you think you're going to lose now is just a tiny pinprick of everything else you're going to lose, and your self-respect. I'm like, hey, if you want to get it and you're enthusiastic about it, I'm fine with that. But if you don't and you allow this, that's crossing a line that's just, there's really no going back from that. Losing your bodily autonomy is just like end game. I once again, I know I said before, but I'm vegan. I don't even like that stuff being done to animals because they don't have a choice in the matter. They don't have any kind of autonomy. They can't figure things out. They can't understand that they're grazing, not because they're going to live the rest of their lives out in pasture. They're going to do something else. And, it's fine. But I mean, it's just like, I don't even like when animals get that done to them. I certainly don't like when someone does it to me. I'm not inviting that type of thing. And I don't think people understand that that's kind of where we're going.
Yeah, exactly.
You're led down that little conveyor belt and you're like, oh, this is different. Okay, we're going on vacation. Oh, this is, and it's like, no, that's not where you're going. You're going somewhere else. And we've seen that happen in history.
Yeah.
A few other times before, right? So
we don't seem to learn anything from history. It seems, which is insane.
Teaching less and less, and that's the problem. Like if you're going from your point of reference when you were in school, and I'm going from my point of reference when I was in school, it looks very different. I didn't realize that until now as well, because now everybody's home, learning from home. I had no idea. I knew these kids were looking kind of weird, and I thought it was, like acting kind of weird, but I thought, oh, it's the devices. It's everything online. It's, no socialization. But now it's a whole nother, I started speaking at school board meetings and getting into that crowd of people who are really putting these people on the ropes, these school boards and curriculum people, and I'm just astounded at what's uncovered. Nothing like my experience of what I went through, or I'm sure what you went through during schooling, or just growing up in general, the whole aspect of it. It's totally indoctrination. There's not much else than that. So
no.
They're up against the lot, because what else do you know but that? That's your point of reference.
Exactly. And that's why when you see young people, particularly at these rallies and stuff, and these young people that are doing podcasts like ours, I'm more kind of like, whoa, like that's even more amazing, because you went through all that shit and you still saw through it. That's amazing, because I was the same as you. I mean, there was some sort of, nonsense at school, but nothing like it is now. And I find like I don't live on the Isle of Wight anymore. It's where I grew up, but I live in Derbyshire now. And so every now and then I'll go to the Isle of Wight. But when I first moved up to Derbyshire, I didn't go back to the island for a while, because I'd broken my tib and fib, and like I told you, it was flapping around. And so I was a bit of a mess, really. I'd had 2 surgeries, and so I wasn't really doing anything. I wasn't able to drive. And so I was just, so I stayed up here for a while. And then I remember going back, and the first thing I noticed was the parks that I used to play football at as a kid, where you just turn up. You wouldn't meet or arrange to, well, there's no mobile phones anyway, but you wouldn't arrange, you just turn up, and you could get a game. There's 3 or 4 games going on, and you could just turn up, go, do you mind if I play? Yeah, you're on that team with that lad. And I remember driving past these parks, like one after the other, and it was a Saturday afternoon, which is why it stuck out to me, and they were empty. maybe an old man walking a dog. There was not one single game of football going on in these places. And I remember like having conversations with friends like, what the hell is that about? It's like, mate, they're all at home playing football on FIFA, you know? And it's like, I'm not that old, am I? For it to be so different from being a kid playing football to now just, no, I play football on a video game. And it's like, but they're still playing football with their friends, but they're playing against their friends. So their friends are sat in their house and they're sat in their house with the headphones on and a microphone going, yeah, mate, just go out and play football, for goodness sake. And it is strange, but it's how these kids have been brought up. And so what adults do they become? You know, ones that are probably happy to sit and work on Zoom.
Yeah, I don't think they do. I think, unfortunately, a lot of them are going to be kind of stunted into this vacuum of this behavior, and it's sad. And a lot of times, I want to hug them. Sometimes, sometimes you don't need words. You just want to, because I think they're scared. I think, when you're in that world and then you go out in the real world, it's very bewildering because you have no experience in that world. I'll see it here. I'm in Florida and it's pretty, it's free and a lot of people don't mask and do things. But so many times I'll see a family, everyone's unmasked except the children. And you can see it's a choice. They want to be masked.
That's heartbreaking, that.
And
but you're so right in terms of the stunting.
It's just that it's this, because how do you evolve out of that? I mean, I don't normally go to Starbucks, and I this one Starbucks near me, every kid looks the same. They all have the tattoos, the piercings, the thing. So this one girl, I went to the drive-thru and she looked so normal. So I said, don't take this the wrong way. I said, but you're the most normal person I've ever had wait on me here. And she goes, oh, I know. She goes, well, when they interview people, they always ask, what's your issue? What do you have?
My God.
Yeah.
But
it's a woke corporation, Gareth. It's a woke corporation. They're nurturing this in these kids. I was in Savannah 2 weeks ago. I got to tell you, I won't even go into that, but I was completely stunned at the things I saw. I mean, I saw more men in skirts than I did women, and they were young adults. There was a design school there. And, it's fine. I get it, but I feel it's not sincere. I feel it's part of a social programming. I'm not judging from a place of they should not be doing that. I'm coming from a place of this is too common now. I'm seeing this too much.
Yeah.
I'm seeing
it's not organic.
Satanic paraphernalia, reptilian stuff that's made to look cool, made to look hip, made to look, I took a lot of pictures of it. I was just and I thought I'd be kind of like mad or annoyed. And actually, I truly felt sad. And I don't mean that in a condescending way. They all had masks on. Most people didn't, and I felt sad because I look into all I could see is their eyes. I look in the eyes and there's not much there. It's very vacant. And I really hope we can turn that ship around. I know you have 2 young children. And, it's just frightening to think that, this is the direction we're going in, because everyone's special, but not because of what they look like, not because of what they believe in, because of who they are. And I don't see it in today's youth. I see this like grabbing onto ideologies. I see this grabbing onto certain images, and then just thinking that makes you complete, that makes you belong, that makes you someone.
Yeah.
So,
it feels very much like this emergence of this non-player character role where, if you've ever played video games, like I remember playing like the odd football game or the odd ice hockey game, but you're in control of, the player who's got the puck or the player who's got the ball, and all your teammates are skating or running around you and getting into position, but no one's in control of them. They're just software programs that are doing that. They're just doing what they are programmed to do, and to skate and run in specific lines and angles. You're in control of your one. You can do little flips and do silly little things and do whatever. And I feel like that sometimes when you look at these people, like you just mentioned there, where you see the eyes, but there's nothing there. And it just feels like it is just a software download. What is the latest download? Dresses and masks. Okay. Well, what's next week's download? Ukraine. Okay. It feels like that there's almost no one behind the wheel.
Yeah, but I feel like there could be, And I understand a lot of time when they're clinging to these ideologies, it's because they want to be good people. And so they're told, but the program tells them to be a good person. You think this, you like this, you look like this. And it's like, but that's not what it's about.
No.
It's just about being your authentic self, accepting yourself for whoever that is, and going from there. And because I see it's coming from a good place. I know it's not coming from a bad place, but it's just so unfortunate, like so incredibly misguided. And
Yeah.
so, it was just, I never thought I'd have that feeling, because it was so prevalent. I'd never been around anything like that. And it was just like, my heart was kind of like achy when I thought it would be like, ugh, not again, because it was something like more of what you see in the media, not what you see in everyday life. And so, I'm really hoping that we can turn the ship around. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I'm really enjoying, I feel like we're really vibing here. But I love what you guys are doing. I love it. I'm definitely a fan. I'm a subscriber.
Oh,
I
thank you
want to
very
thank
much.
you. I want to thank you so much. And what I love is, like, yes, your father has this legacy, but you guys, it's so cool to see you guys kind of branching onto your own and just doing your own expression of, what freedom means, and, just putting something new out into the world. So I really appreciate that. And I guess my last question would just be like, where do you see the future of media going? Do you see more iconics, not just like Iconic, but the basic underlying principle and idea of it? Do you see more of that coming in, or do you see you guys kind of just people just once again just, I don't know, pandering to even the alternative mainstream?
I think there will be more of them. I think that they're trying to, the establishment obviously thinks there is, because they're pushing through these online harm bills and all this stuff to try and silence these people, including myself and yourself. Um, but no, I do think there'll be more, because I think deep down, like, people know something's not right. I had conversations with people throughout kind of the whole COVID thing, because I live in a little village. I'm just moving actually, but I live in a little village, and I'm moving to another little village, where they don't know who I am and I don't really know who they are. So they would just talk to you in a normal kind of, and so it's not like they were going, oh, that guy, he presents this show that's alternative, so actually he might listen to me. They have no idea who I am, but they will say it's weird, isn't it? And I would say that a lot to people. It's weird, isn't it? What's happening? It's just weird, isn't it? And you then they would be like, yeah, it's weird, isn't it? And they would start to question it. So even though they might be wearing a mask or whatever, deep down they know something isn't right. And so it's only then a matter of time before people want to find out exactly what that is. And so they go searching, and then you go to the mainstream, you're not going to get any answers. And so I think people are then searching. So I guess it's like anything. If you've got supply and demand, the more demand there is for alternative voices and for different perspectives, the more of those that will emerge, because that's just how life works. Um, the way I look at it is, and this is another reason why we've got entertainment shows on Ickonic, like The Walk is an entertainment show and WTAF is an entertainment show. Right now is, news and current affairs and stuff. But what I think is, I am so sure that we're going to win this, and that this whole spell that is on humanity, and I do believe that it is a spell, and the people we've spoken about with the masks and the skirts and stuff, there's a spell there that I honestly believe it's going to be lifted. It's going to be driven away. And so I want Iconic. I'm thinking about what Iconic's going to be afterwards. After all this nonsense is done, and we don't have to scream about COVID and manufactured wars and depopulation. We've dealt with them. Let's go for a walk. And so it's almost like I'm kind of trying to, and I know my brother's exactly the same, trying to think beyond it. Whereas a lot, as you've alluded to, within the mainstream alternative, which is a really good description of it, it's almost like they kind of almost don't want it to end. Because when it ends, well, the financial side ends, but the purpose ends. What do I do now? What do I do now? I don't know. Put your feet up, mate. You've earned it. So for me, I'm looking beyond it, rather than always looking at the bad and the evil and what we're facing, which obviously you have to acknowledge, but also go, yeah, okay, well, I'm going to deal with you, and when I've dealt with you, this is what we're going to do, and that's how I see what we're trying to do here. Anyway, quite positive.
Yeah, I feel it's so important, because we can't just constantly be caught in this cycle of always this fighting, this, good versus bad and everything else. We have to just carry on too and remember what it's like to be human. And I feel like a lot of your content though, because I started subscribing in November 2020, and it's just so much now has like you're just constantly bringing new content to the forefront. And what's interesting is a lot of it is different. It's not always of the same like ideology, I guess, that I would guess, and I'm just guessing, you guys would be on board with. So I've watched a few things and I'm like, I don't know about that, but I'm glad it was on there because I'm like,
Yeah,
okay, it doesn't always have to be, well, this is what we believe, so we're pushing everything out. It's like, well, here's a little bit of everything and use your own mind and figure it out. And we need so much more of that. It's not like telling people how to think. It's just showing people what's out there and giving them resources to kind of craft in their own mind, what do I think about this, or what do I feel about this, based on some of the things that I've seen or heard and how I feel. And you just kind of take it all in and figure it out from there, because it's always a journey, right? It's never a destination. I like to say the destination is the journey.
yeah,
Waiting for us to get to that point, because
yeah.
we are so destination focused in our society. It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, what label you are. We're always looking for that end game. But I'm like, no, I think we need to do the opposite. We need to not forget about the end game, because that's what takes all the fun out of life, right?
Exactly. Was it like life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans? I think that's exactly right. It was John Lennon on it. I think that's exactly right. Yeah, definitely. And I've been guilty of it in my past of being a musician and being like focused on this goal. And it's actually, I did like 6 weeks on, 2 weeks off for 5 years in a tour bus. And I was so driven on creating this kind of career that actually I probably didn't enjoy. Well, what I should have been doing is just having a laugh with my mates. But you live and learn, don't you? But yeah, you're right. You're right.
Yeah, I've been guilty of that for most of my entire life, but it's never too late, and now I'm just like, wow, I really see things for what it is. Told people I was starting a podcast, and I was like, oh, well, maybe it'll get really big and maybe you could put your job into. I'm like, I'm not worried about that. I just want to push good content, get great guests, have great conversations, and just take it day by day.
Exactly.
I felt compelled to do this because I wanted to talk to folks like you, but I can't very well just email you and be like, hey, can we just talk? So, this was a great outlet for me. And I hope for other people listening, and to just get different perspectives, people who are doing different things, people who are thinking differently. I think that in itself is revolutionary at the point we're in right now. Just thinking
100%.
differently. Just
Yeah.
thinking differently can shift everything, your perspective, everything.
Yeah.
So
You're
with that
absolutely right.
said, I really want to thank you so much for taking the time. This has been great. Thank you for all you guys do. Thank you for your work. Thank you for right now. Excited to see the walk in August, I believe, right? That's when the new season's coming up. Anything, where can people find you? Anything else you want people to know about what's coming up?
I'm still on Twitter now for the time being. I've had like a ridiculous amount of bans, so the next one's almost certainly permanent. But I'm on Getter and stuff as well, just under my name. And on Telegram, there's a Right Now Telegram page where we just share articles and stuff, but we also share content from the show and stuff. And so it's just about getting information out there. That's my kind of what I feel is my purpose, really. If I get sent stuff, then I share it with everyone. And yeah, that's it. Yeah, so ickonic.com. And there's a 7-day free trial as well at the minute. So if people that are watching this are obviously kind of thinking, it's another subscription channel, then go and check it out and see what you think with a free trial. The reason it's subscription is we didn't want to advertise because you get a conflict of interest there. What if on Right Now we break a story about the company that's one of the biggest people advertising? There's going to be a conflict of, well, we want to expose them, but if they pull the advertising, the channel goes down, all that sort of nonsense. Whereas like subscription based, it's paid for by the subscribers, so they own it basically in that sense.
Yeah, I think we should shift to that altogether. I've shifted my email. I pay for it, and I have no problem with that. I think we need to stop getting, because nothing's ever free, right?
No,
Also,
this is true.
The level of production you're doing, I mean, it definitely merits a subscription. I mean, I think we need to not be apologetic about just asking for the energy for our energy. It's just an energetic exchange, and I definitely feel it's well worth it, and it's very affordable. So nothing wrong with that. But thank you so much. Would you just hang on 1 second? I'm going to stop the recording, but I just want to thank you again, Gareth, for everything you do. And that's a wrap.
Awesome. Thanks. I apologize.